In the lesson on functions, we discussed how we can have formal parameters of the fundamental types, and so we can pass in integers or floats, for example. Now in this example, we will see that we can also pass in arguments of our custom types, in this case instances of structs, for example, and in future lessons we will also look at classes. Alright, so in this example we can see we have a vector 2D struct with these two members. We have some function print location, and as a formal parameter that has vector 2D location. And so with that we can do this printout, we do location.x and location.y. Then in the main function, let's go and talk a bit about instantiation again. So declaring and initializing variables. We've seen how we can declare and initialize a variable of the fundamental type, so int x for example. We can do the assignment operator and we can assign, or in other words store some value, such as in this case 47, into that variable, so x. And we can also use this sort of initialization as well. In this example I'm using brace initialization, and that's handy if you want to initialize multiple things on the same line, so you don't have to do multiple lines like this. Alright, so we can do something similar with our custom types where we instantiate that. So vector 2D, we have location 1, we use the assignment operator, but how do we now create a temporary object of this particular type of vector 2D? Because this right here, this 47, this is a literal integer 47, and that is basically a temporary object. So how do we create something similar? So a temporary object of a custom type. So in this case we can do vector 2D, and we can use this sort of syntax right here. We can do the same thing for the temporary object. So we do vector 2D, we use brace initialization. You can use parentheses to construct the object, but I prefer to use braces. So again, this will construct a temporary object, and that will then be assigned or used to initialize location 1, this vector right here. Then we can also do this straight version as we can do with y here. We can do the braces and simply construct location 2 in this way instead of using the assignment operator. And of course this is a shorter version to do the same thing, so it's less typing to do the same thing. And then we can invoke that function print location, and in this case we are passing in this location 2, and so it should print out these values right here. It is essentially going to make a copy, as with the fundamental types that we discussed before in the functions lesson. We pass in location 2 as an argument. This function is actually going to make a copy of that. So location here is going to be a copy of the argument, and then we are going to print that out. Once the function print location exits, so once execution returns to the main function, then we destroy the local variable location. Okay, back in main we can also do this where we pass in a temporary object. I mentioned how we can construct a temporary object to use for assignment. Now we can do the same thing for an argument. So this is basically like passing in a literal, as we did in previous examples for functions. You can pass in, let's say the function accepts an integer, then you can simply pass in that integer. So how do we do that with our custom types? Well, we construct it in this way. Again, I'm using braces for the construction, and I'm passing in my values, and this temporary object will now be received by the function. A copy of that will be constructed, and then once the function exits, the local variable will again be destroyed. We return to main, and then we execute the rest of these statements. Of course, the local temporary object will then be destroyed. So of course the difference here is that where we construct the temporary object here, we do not have a handle, or in other words a variable name. So an identifier such as location 2 or location 1 with this example, where we construct this one as well, we have access to that, but with the temporary object in this example we do not have access to that. It is simply going to be created and destroyed. And this is an example of hard coding. You don't always really want to do that. It is often best to instead actually create a variable and then pass that in. But I'm just demonstrating this, how you can use a temporary object for an argument as well. So if we build and run, we can see that that works with the argument that we passed in, the variable, the instance that we passed in, but also with the temporary object that we passed in. Okay, so that is going to wrap up this lecture. We looked at how we can pass in our instances as arguments to functions. Again, you need to specify that type for the formal parameter, so in this case vector 2D. And we also talked a bit about instantiation, so how we can create variables of our types, how we can construct temporary objects or literals of our custom types. Okay, as we can see here, and then also here where we pass that in as an argument.